Your mind is a powerful storyteller, but not all of its stories are true. In fact, the most dangerous lies you'll ever hear aren't from the outside world, they come from within. They're the whispers in your mind that twist what you see into something far worse than it actually is. When you see your ex with someone new, what happens? Your heart pounds, your stomach tightens, and suddenly your brain fires off a movie reel of worst case scenarios. They've moved on. They never loved me. I wasn't enough. The pain doesn't come from what's actually happening. It comes from what your mind is telling you it means. Let's break this down logically. You don't actually know what's going on in their life. You don't know if they're happy, if they're fulfilled, or if they're desperately trying to fill a void they refuse to confront. But because emotion distorts reality, your brain will default to the most painful interpretation. Why? Because the mind craves certainty, even if that certainty is built on falsehoods. The truth is, human beings aren't wired for instant healing. Love, attachment, and connection don't simply vanish overnight. Even if someone looks like they've moved on, that doesn't mean they actually have. We live in a world where appearances are everything. People put on masks, post highlight reels, and curate their lives to look perfect while silently battling internal chaos. Think about the last time you pretended to be okay when you weren't. The last time you smiled in public but felt like breaking inside. We've all done it. So why would your ex be any different? Just because they're standing next to someone new doesn't mean they're standing on solid ground. What's even more important to understand is this. Your mind fills in gaps with assumptions. If you don't have all the information, your brain will invent it. It's a survival mechanism. Our ancestors needed to predict threats to stay alive, but in relationships, this instinct works against us. You see a single photo, a moment in time, and your brain rushes to construct an entire narrative. But narratives aren't truth. They're stories. And just because a story feels real doesn't mean it is. Now let's talk about emotional biases. Your perception is filtered through your past experiences, your insecurities, and your pain. If deep down you fear being unworthy, your mind will search for evidence to confirm it. This is called confirmation bias, and it's one of the biggest traps you can fall into. Instead of seeing the situation for what it actually is, you see what your pain wants you to see. But here's what's real. The past mattered. The connection you shared with this person mattered. And if they've rushed into something new, that doesn't erase what was real. It doesn't rewrite history. It doesn't make you less valuable. What it actually means is that they are avoiding sitting with themselves. They are choosing distraction over depth. And that's not love. That's escapism. Most people are terrified of being alone. They don't want to face their own emptiness, so they run. They fill the silence with noise, the space with another person, the wound with a temporary bandage. But no matter how fast they run, reality always catches up because you can't heal what you refuse to feel. So if you're sitting here staring at their new relationship thinking it's proof that you weren't enough, stop. You are watching an illusion, a projection of what they want the world to see. But perception is not reality. Reality is what happens when the cameras are off, when the distractions fade, when they are left with nothing but their own reflection. And in that moment, they will come face to face with something undeniable. Whatever they ran from is still there. We live in a world where speed is celebrated. Fast food, fast results, fast love. Society has conditioned us to believe that if we're not constantly moving, we're falling behind. That belief seeps into relationships, making people think that the best way to deal with heartbreak is to replace what was lost as quickly as possible. But let's get something straight. Just because someone moves on fast doesn't mean they've healed. It doesn't mean they're better off. It doesn't mean they've truly let go. In fact, the speed at which they move on often reveals just how much they haven't processed. Because real healing, real self-growth, that takes time, effort, and a level of emotional courage that most people aren't willing to embrace. Now think about this. What happens when someone jumps from one relationship to the next without taking a break? They carry the same unresolved wounds. the same unprocessed emotions, and the same unhealthy patterns into their next connection. They don't transform, they transfer. Instead of facing their baggage, they hand it off to the next person, hoping that this new relationship will somehow erase the pain of the last one. But pain doesn't disappear just because you cover it up. It lingers beneath the surface, waiting for the right trigger to bring it back up. It might not happen today, it might not happen next week, but at some point they will have to confront what they've buried. And by then, they'll realize that moving on isn't about replacing, it's about repairing. Now let's talk about why people rush into something new. One of the biggest reasons is avoidance. Most people don't want to sit in discomfort. They don't want to acknowledge their role in the breakup. They don't want to face the truth about who they are when they're alone. So instead of doing the hard work of self-reflection, they seek out a quick distraction. They tell themselves that a new relationship will fix everything. They convince themselves that if they can just find someone else, they won't have to deal with the emptiness inside. But a distraction is not a cure. It's a temporary Band-Aid over a wound that still exists. And the moment reality sets in, the moment the honeymoon phase fades, they will realize that nothing has truly changed. They are still the same person with the same emotional wounds, just in a different situation. Another reason people rush into a new relationship is validation. Breakups shake a person's sense of self-worth. Suddenly they go from feeling wanted to feeling discarded. That can be a massive hit to the ego. And for many, the quickest way to feel desirable again is to jump into something new. They need to prove to themselves and to others that they are still attractive, still lovable, still chosen. So they rush to find someone who will give them that reassurance, someone who will fill the space that was left behind. But here's the problem. When you rely on someone else to validate your worth, you are never truly secure. Because the moment that validation disappears, you're left feeling empty again. And that's when the cycle repeats itself. Then there's revenge or guilt-based relationships. Sometimes a person doesn't move on for themselves, they do it to get a reaction. Maybe they want to prove to you that they don't need you. Maybe they want to make you jealous. Maybe they feel guilty about hurting you, so they convince themselves that getting into a new relationship quickly is the right thing to do. Whatever the case, their decision is not coming from a place of true emotional readiness. It's coming from a need to manipulate the situation, whether consciously or unconsciously. And let's not forget about the fear of being alone. So many people are terrified of solitude. They've spent so much of their lives attached to another person that they don't even know who they are outside of a relationship. So when a breakup happens, instead of using that time to rediscover themselves, they desperately seek out someone new. Not because they're truly in love, but because they don't know how to be on their own. But here's the catch. If you never learn to be alone, you will always be dependent on someone else for your happiness. You will constantly need another person to fill the void that only you can truly heal. And that's not love. That's fear disguised as connection. This is why the illusion of moving on is so dangerous. Because from the outside, it looks like progress. It looks like happiness. It looks like growth. But in reality, it's often just a coping mechanism designed to avoid the real work of healing. What most people don't realize is that true healing happens in the space between relationships. It happens in the quiet moments when you're forced to sit with your emotions, when you face your insecurities head on, when you learn how to love yourself without needing someone else to do it for you. That's the real definition of moving on, not rushing into something new, but growing into a version of yourself that no longer needs to escape. There's a dangerous habit we fall into after a breakup. We start believing that our worth is tied to what someone else does next. We give their actions meaning. We make their choices a reflection of ourselves. If they move on fast, we assume we weren't good enough. If they seem happy, we believe we were the problem. If they never look back, we convince ourselves that we were forgettable. But let me make one thing clear. Their choices have nothing to do with your value. Read that again. Say it out loud if you need to. Because until you truly understand this, you will stay stuck in a cycle of self-doubt, insecurity, and unnecessary pain. People make decisions based on their own emotions, their own wounds, and their own fears. The way they move forward after a breakup is a direct reflection of them, not you. You do not lose value just because someone fails to see it. You do not become less worthy just because someone else is distracted. And you sure as hell do not become replaceable just because they choose to entertain something new. Think about it like this. If you walk into a museum and see a priceless piece of art, does that painting lose its value just because one person walks past it without noticing? No, the art is still valuable. It is still extraordinary. Whether one person acknowledges it or not is irrelevant. The same applies to you. Now let's talk about control. One of the hardest things to accept in life is that you cannot control other people. You cannot control their healing process, their rebound relationships, or their ability or inability to reflect on the past. You can't make them see what they don't want to see. You can't force them to appreciate what they failed to value when they had it. But what you can control is you. You control how you respond. You control the story you tell yourself. You control whether you allow someone else's choices to shake your confidence, or whether you stand firm in the knowledge that their actions do not determine your self-worth. The problem is we often give our power away without realizing it. We sit around analyzing their new relationship, comparing ourselves to the next person, replaying old conversations, and searching for answers that don't exist. We waste our energy looking backward when we should be investing it in moving forward. Because here's the truth. The moment you start basing your confidence on someone else's validation, you lose control over your own happiness. If you let their choices dictate how you feel about yourself, you are putting your self-worth in hands that don't deserve to hold it. Now let's go deeper. Why do we do this? Why do we let someone else's actions make us question ourselves? Because as human beings, we crave certainty. We want to believe that if someone stays, it means we're lovable. If they leave, it means we're not. If they regret losing us, it proves we were valuable. If they don't, it makes us doubt our worth. But that's a flawed way of thinking, because real self-worth isn't dependent on who stays or who leaves. Real self-worth isn't built on whether someone realizes your value. It's built on whether you realize it. This is why people who truly know their worth don't panic when someone walks away. They don't spiral when an ex moves on. They don't need external validation to remind them of what they bring to the table. They already know. And that's the energy you need to step into. Imagine you're walking through a store holding a $100 bill. Now imagine someone walks up to you and says, "That's worthless." Do you immediately throw the money away? Do you start questioning whether it really has value? No, because you know it's worth something. Just because one person fails to see its value doesn't mean the value isn't there. This is how you need to start seeing yourself. If someone moves on fast, it doesn't mean you weren't enough. It means they weren't ready to process. If they never come back, it doesn't mean you weren't special. It means they weren't capable of appreciating what they had. If they seem happier with someone else, it doesn't mean you are the problem. It means they are seeking a different experience. None of this means you are any less. But the real question is, are you going to let someone else's choices determine how you see yourself? Or are you going to take back control? Because the most dangerous thing you can do is let someone else's decisions dictate your confidence, your future, and your peace. When you let that happen, you are essentially handing over the keys to your happiness and saying, "Here, you decide how I feel about myself." But that's not power, that's self-abandonment. And you were never meant to give your power away. Pain is inevitable. Every person who has ever loved deeply has felt the sting of loss. Every person who has ever opened their heart has at some point felt it break. But pain itself is not the enemy. Pain is the teacher. Pain is the wake-up call. Pain is the doorway to transformation, if you allow it to be. Most people don't. Most people run from it. They numb it with distractions. They drown it in temporary pleasures. They convince themselves that moving on means moving away from the pain as quickly as possible. But avoiding pain doesn't make it disappear. It just buries it deeper. And buried pain doesn't stay buried forever. It resurfaces when you least expect it, showing up as insecurity, self-doubt, emotional walls, and patterns you don't even realize you're repeating. So what if you chose something different? What if, instead of running, you leaned into the pain and let it sharpen you? What if you used it as fuel, as motivation, as a tool to become something stronger than you were before? Think about this. Every great success story has a moment of struggle. Every powerful leader, every artist, every visionary has had to walk through fire. Not a single person who has ever achieved something extraordinary did so without facing a breaking point first. Pain can break you, but only if you let it. The ones who rise, the ones who turn heartbreak into power, they are the ones who refuse to let it define them. See, pain is like a sculptor. It chisels away at you, carving out the weak parts, shaping you into something new. But only if you stop resisting the process. Only if you stop seeing it as a punishment and start seeing it as preparation. Right now you have two choices. You can let this experience harden you, make you bitter, make you close off, make you doubt your own worth. Or you can let it mold you into a version of yourself that you wouldn't have reached otherwise. You can let it teach you what you need to heal. You can let it show you where your real strength lies. You can let it strip away the illusions and force you to see yourself clearly, maybe for the first time in your life. This is your moment of transformation. But transformation doesn't happen without action. You cannot just wait for time to heal you. Time doesn't heal. What you do with the time heals. You must take the pain and use it. Use it to fuel your growth. Use it to push yourself beyond what you thought you were capable of. Use it to build the life you've been putting off, the life you deserve. Because here's what happens when you refuse to let pain break you. One day you wake up and realize you're not the same person you were. You're stronger, you're wiser, you're more confident. And the things that once made you doubt yourself, the things that once shattered you, they no longer hold power over you. Pain doesn't define you. How you respond to pain defines you. What you choose to do with it determines whether it becomes your greatest weakness or your greatest weapon, and the choice is yours.